start out with a presentation on human service caseloads with Amanda Prosser, KLRD. Amanda, welcome committee.
All right. Good morning, Chair and Committee. My name is Amanda Prosser. I am with Legislative Research, and today I will provide an overview of the revised estimates for human services expenditures for the current state fiscal year 26, along with projections for 27. I've been asked to keep this brief to allow maximum time for Director Profit, but I'm happy to meet offline if anyone has any additional questions. The estimates before you were developed by the Human Services Case Consensus Group, which includes the Division of Budget, Legislative Research, with subject matter expertise from the Department of Children and Families, the Department for Health and Environment, and the Department for Aging and Disability Services. These estimates cover major human services programs, including foster care, TANF cash assistance, CanCare Medical, and KDAD's non-CanCare programs. The starting point for this estimate is the budget approved by the 2025 Legislature in SB 125. As a reminder, the state fiscal year 26 budget did not include the spring estimates because the session ended in April rather than May. Turning to the overall picture, the revised estimate for fiscal year 26 is $431 million above the approved budget, a 7.4% increase across all funding sources. However, the state general fund portion decreases by $68.9 million or 3.7%. For fiscal year 27, the total expenditures are projected to increase by $246.2 million or 3.9% with an SGF increase of $26.8 million above the revised fiscal 26 estimate. This year, the consensus group added an addendum to provide transparency. That addendum is the beige sheet in front of you, and today my remarks will largely follow that table. Beginning with foster care, which is on page 2 of the gray memo, if you're looking at that, and it's the first section in the beige sheet. The revised estimate is $339 million in fiscal year 26, including $263 million state general fund, to serve approximately 5,400 children per month. The major cost drivers include case management, direct placement costs, child placing agency administration, and other adjustments. The consensus group did not identify any new policy or legislative adjustments for foster care at this time. But to note about those lines in the beige table, in instances where there would be something identified, it is the intent of the consensus group to only call them out in this line for the initial year of impact, because then it will likely get absorbed into other cost drivers in future years. The next cost driver in the table there is case management costs, which reflect the contractual payments to the state's 5 foster care providers and are driven by average monthly caseloads. The fiscal year 26 SGF increase is largely attributable to the executive order requiring state general funds to be used in place of SSI and SSA funds. Costs in both 26 and 27 are also influenced by higher than anticipated caseloads in Wichita. Moving down the table, the direct placement costs are paid to foster families and facilities to increase due to rate adjustments in residential and group home settings for children with higher levels of care. Child placing agency costs reflect payments for licensing, oversight, and support services. Other adjustments include care match, home studies, qualified residential treatment program assessments, the standby bed network, family functional therapy, and therapeutic foster home supports. Next on the beige table is TANF cash assistance. This program provides monthly financial support to very low-income families with children and is fully federally funded. Expenditures are projected at $9.3 million in both 26 and 27, serving an average monthly caseload of approximately 7,000 individuals. The next section addresses CanCare Medical, which is the largest component of human services expenditures. CanCare is administered jointly by KDHE and KDADS. Combined fiscal year 26 spending is estimated at $5.8 billion, including $1.4 billion state general fund, and fiscal year 27 spending is projected at $6 billion with an SGF of $1.5 billion. For KDHE, policy adjustments include the pending approval of a state plan amendment related to the removal of the inmate exclusion for incarcerated youth, which subsequently will allow for targeted case management and health screenings prior to their release. For KDADS, policy adjustments include funding for transitional services for individuals moving from state institutions to the home community-based services waiver. Within that policy adjustments lines, KDADS is requesting $12.1 million all funds, including $4.6 million state general fund for fiscal year 27 to support specialty PRTFs designed for youth with complex behavioral or mental health needs. It is the view of the consensus group that this particular item would require specific approval from the legislature to meet the requirements of Senate Substitute for House Bill 2240 as passed last session. That being said, it is also the view of the consensus group that this request do be included in caseloads as it addresses the findings of a study required by the 2023 legislature that examined gaps within the current system. Moving on to legislative adjustments for KDHE, this line reflects items approved by the 2025 legislature, including rate increases for vagus nerve stimulation implants, dental services, pediatric services, complex wheelchair assessments, and Alzheimer care planning. These costs appear in fiscal year 26 legislative adjustments and are incorporated into the managed care capitation payments for fiscal year 27. For legislative adjustments impacting the KDADS portion of CanCare Medical, this includes one-time funding in 26 for a behavioral health pilot, adolescent substance use of treatment rate increases, nursing facility rate rebasing, and supplemental nursing facility payments. The one-time behavioral health and add-on nursing facility findings is removed in 27. Turning to page 4 on the gray memo, or the MCO expenditures line on the beige sheet. These reflect contractual payments to managed care organizations and are driven by enrollment and acuity of services received. For 26 and 27, decreases across all funding sources are primarily due to lower member estimates. Next in the memo and on the table are the non-MCO expenditures paid by KDHE. These too are calculated with actuaries, determining the per member per month rate. For 26 and 27, the increase is primarily attributable to changes in the Health Care Access Improvement Program, known as HCAP. Last session, House Substitute for Senate Bill 126 increased the annual assessment rate to 6% and included critical access hospitals and licensed rural emergency hospitals that have revenues above an approved threshold. However, while the beige sheet shows it as an SGF increase, HCAP is considered SGF neutral as the program results in increased federal funds that support our state's Medicaid program. Additional KDADS-related CanCare medical cost drivers include nursing facility and CCBHC rebasing, as well as other adjustments for provider reimbursements, transportation and observation costs, and select rate increases. These are contained within the other adjustments line on the beige sheet. Lastly, with regards to CanCare Medical, you can see that the rows titled SGF offsets, these reduce the net SGF spend through various sources of revenue. It includes the drug rebates, the HMO privilege fees, hospital provider assessments, nursing facility assessments, and the problem gambling fund. Finally, the non-CanCare section on page 5 of the memo reflects KDAD's programs outside managed care, including nursing facilities, PACE, waiver assessments, and state hospitals. No policy or legislative adjustments are identified for either year. The 26 revised estimate reflects $11.2 million all funds increase, primarily due to recalculating the PACE payment rate. Fiscal year 27 expenditures are projected at $158.1 million all funds driven by PACE rate recalculations, nursing facility rebase, and inflation. In conclusion, the consensus group estimates total human services caseload expenditures of $6.3 billion in 26, including $1.8 billion or 28% from the state general fund. For fiscal year 27, state general fund expenditures are projected to increase about 1.5% above the revised 26 estimate, largely driven by CanCare Medical. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions or speak with anyone offline after this.
Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll have a presentation on the education caseloads. Jennifer Light, KLRD. Jennifer, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Light. I'm a senior fiscal analyst with KLRD, and I have the KSE budget. The goldenrod sheet in front of you that is 8.5 or 11 by 14 is a table which covers the fall 2025 education consensus estimate and changes from the approved amounts. The education consensus team met on November 5th, and as Amanda mentioned for her parts on the human services caseloads, while the spring consensus happened, it was not included in any legislation from last year for education as well. So the document in front of you is the same as in previous years and shows estimates for 26, 27, and 28, along with the difference between fiscal years 25 and 27 on the very right-hand columns. The top sections are the major components of the state aid, and the bottom is the total amounts for SGF and all funds. In base aid, for fiscal year 2026, the amount is $5,615. For 2027, the estimate is now $5,782, which is done by an increase in the CPIU 3-year average. And then for fiscal year 2028, $5,944. I would remind you that the school finance formula is going to be coming up for renewal. And so the fiscal year 2028 is based on current law and not on anything as far as what changes may occur. So fiscal year 28 is based on if nothing changed in the school finance formula and it continued on as normal. For state foundation aid in fiscal year 2026, it is $3.8 billion, including $2.76 million SGF. This is a decrease of $75.5 million all funds. For fiscal year 27, it's $3.9 million, including $2.85 million SGF, which is a decrease of $44.5 million in all funds. And in fiscal year 28, it'd be $4 billion, including $2.9 million SGF, which is an increase of $109 million from fiscal year 2027. The decreases in fiscal years 26 and 27 are due to anticipated decreases both in headcount and in weighted FTE. You can see that in the line for weighted FTE, it moves from 675,000 to 663,000. And the SGF decrease is due to the 20 mills bringing in more funding than anticipated. For supplemental state aid, this is based on property tax. In fiscal year 2026, it's $595 million, which is a decrease of $38 million from the appropriation. Fiscal year 27 is $613 million, which is a decrease of $24 million. And fiscal year 28 is $630 million, which is an increase of $17 million from fiscal year 2027. For special education, fiscal year 2026 does include the reappropriations from the last year, and so it is slightly higher. Fiscal years 27 and 28 is at $611 million. In 27, that puts us at 64.6% of excess costs, and in 28, that is 61.5% of excess costs. We leave this flat when we're doing estimates unless there is a specific addition to the appropriation by the legislature or a stated legislative plan to increase it, so that is why it remains at that $611 million. In capital outlay, we are looking at the same amount in fiscal year 2026 as previously estimated, $109 million. Fiscal year 27 is an increase of $1 million to $112 million. Fiscal year 2028's estimate is $115 million. For capital improvements, we're looking at $195 million for all 3 years. This is a decrease in fiscal year 2026 of $13 million. And then for CAPERS, there are the contribution rates that make changes, and so we adjusted the estimates as necessary for that. Happy to discuss those specifically or just move on to questions, Mr. Chair.
I think, does anyone have any questions at this time? Chairman Waymaster.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you had mentioned before that the current school finance formula is supposed to expire starting in fiscal year 2027. But looking at the bottom estimates, I mean, we're seeing in fiscal year 26, and we also reappropriated about $30 million from what was approved by the 2025 legislature. And an SGF total is a reduction of $158 million in 26, 106 million, I guess it's a change of 110 million from a difference in 26 and 27. And then in 28, we have an SGF total of an increase of $117 million. So if the funding source is staying the same, why are we seeing such a stark increase in 2028 if it's not changed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the first estimate for fiscal year 2028. As we do the estimating and we go along the process, there is generally a decrease as we go through for the current year and the budget year. For the first fiscal year outwards, we are basing it off of estimates, and the estimates include percentages increases that we are anticipating. Obviously, the student count can change and the weighted FTEs can change based on what is currently there, and that's why most of the time you will see decreases in the current year and budget year and a higher number in the out year.
Okay, well, and that's the reason why in fiscal year 26 we're seeing a reduction is because the enrollment numbers were down. And I'm just kind of wondering in 28, or is the expectation that student enrollment numbers are going to be up or stagnant?
So the student head count is not anticipated to go up. However, we do anticipate that the percentages of students who are needing the extra weightings, so the weighting FTE, will increase from the previous year. And so that is just a standard assumption that we have as we move forward. But the majority of it is based on the fact that the weightings themselves are anticipated to go up and not just the head count. Yes, the head count will go down in the estimate, but the weightings are based off of how many students need those extra help.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to follow up on that, so why are you anticipating the weightings to go up?
So this is going to sound a little confusing. We anticipate weightings to go up from the previous year, so it continues to slightly increase as we have looked at the trend line for the weightings over the course of time. A lot of times when we're looking at the current year, we end up reducing it because it did not increase as much as we were anticipating. So when you're looking at that SGF increase, you're looking at an SGF increase from the previous year because we did not have an estimate before. And so we're saying it's going to go up in the amount of money needed. And so therefore, because it is going up in the amount of money needed, there will be more SGF that is going to be requested.
Other questions? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the special education, I'm looking at it, and other than we added 10 million last year, there's no other additional monies because the 10 million we did before wasn't continuous. So we haven't increased anything, right?
So the amount of money appropriated for each previous year continues into the next year. And so last year there was a $10 million increase, which puts us at the $611 million. And so the way that the consensus estimate group works is they do not assume there will be more money put in by the legislature in future years. So for 27 and for 28, we maintain it at the spot that it is for the amount in 26.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Seeing none? Thank you a lot. Appreciate your being here. Next, we will move on to a briefing on the governor's budget recommendations. We'll have Director Adam Profit, Division of Budget, and Adam's not feeling well, and so he's going to be on WebEx. So, Adam, are you there?
Yes, I am. Mr. Chair, are you able to hear me okay?
Not really. You might, I don't know, we might keep
I have an
talking.
adjustment I can make if you can give me just 1 minute.
Yeah, it appears to be an echo. You know,
Mr. Chair, is this any better?
Yes, that's better.
Alrighty. Well, I went with the air traffic controller headphones here, so you'll have to bear with me as you visualize that. And I believe, Mr. Chair, not to get ahead of you, I believe the presentation is actually being distributed right now in hard copy. So I'm happy to wait until that's out there to avoid any noise.
Yeah, yes, it's being distributed. So give us just a second. I'll let you know when everyone has it.
Yes, sir.
Everybody got one, you think? I'll hand it out. If you'd like to proceed, please.
Very good. Just double checking that you are able to hear me, sir.
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, and I am trying to present here. So are you able to see my screen up on the TVs?
Yes, you're on the screen.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. Well, thank you, Chairman Billinger and Chairman Waymaster and member of the committee, and also I appreciate the willingness to allow me to present this virtually. I apologize for not being there in person, but I think it's probably better for everybody's weekend if I'm not there, so you can enjoy it healthily. So I'm going to walk through the governor's budget for fiscal 27. There's some slight modifications of fiscal 26, but I'm going to focus today on fiscal 27. So we got here kind of the agenda and items that we're going to cover today. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but wanted to make sure that we were able to kind of set the table of what I want to spend some time on today. So before we jump into this year's budget, I did want to spend some time recognizing some of the successes we've had over the past 7 years partnering together. There's clearly been a strong willingness to partner between the legislature and the governor to attack some of the items that we all knew were kind of outstanding and holding the state back. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this. It hasn't been easy, but the result has been remarkable. And we've really cleaned up the state's fiscal health. I've listed a whole host of topics on here, some areas that we've cleaned up. I won't read every single one of them, but I do want to highlight just a few of them for the committee, because I think these are things that we should really be proud of and really demonstrate what we can do together as we partner on these types of things. So top one there is we've been able to pay down over $2 billion in debt, which has really set us up for long-term success. That third bullet there, at the same time, we've been able to reduce taxes for citizens by over $1 billion per year. We closed the Bank of KDOT, which had been open for decades. At the same time we closed that, we opened the Budget Stabilization Fund, and it's sitting at right around $2 billion right now. So that will help safeguard against any currently unforeseen economic headwinds, which will be helpful. There's some other items on there, but really what we did is eliminated all the accounting gimmicks and all the budget and maneuvers that have been used to prop up the state's budget for many, many years. So the result of that is when you look at a budget today, you pick up a budget document, it is an accurate reflection of what the state's fiscal health is, and it provides you a guide path for how we can move forward and what things are going to look like. Additionally, it also led to credit rating improvement and some outlook improvement. We're getting recognized by the national credit ratings for the work that we've done. So just want to say thank you to the legislature for the partnership on this. And the governor and the entire administration certainly wants to continue that partnership and do this good work for the people of Kansas as we move forward. So the starting point for this year's budget, as many of you probably know, the governor went on what she called the People's Budget Listening Tour. And really the goal of this tour was to seek input directly from Kansans from all across the state and to hear from them what their budget priorities would be. We can get kind of isolated here in Topeka, so she wanted to make sure she got all across the state. So you can see the map at the bottom that shows each of the stops that she made, tried to crisscross the entire state and get some feedback. So it was a strong reception. There was nearly 820 Kansans that attended and or provided feedback. And a lot of that feedback, specifically the key themes, are reflected in to take that to heart and put this in to make this the people's budget moving forward. So as I mentioned, there were some key themes that had emerged as we dropped into each of the 8 spots. And I've highlighted the most prominent ones here, the most frequent, I would say. The one that came top of mind at every single stop was K-12 education. There was a strong desire to ensure that we continue to fund K-12 education at the constitutional levels, both general education, but also special education. We know that there have been some shortfalls there as a state over the past decade or so. So a lot of focus on that from the folks that we chatted with. Also want to make sure that we continue all the investments we've made in mental health services and community-based programs. They recognize that the state's done a lot of work here, pardon me, over the years, and want to make sure that we keep on track there. These next two, admittedly for me, caught me a little bit by surprise. I didn't anticipate these to rise to the top as much as they did at several of the stops that we were at. But many of the constituents recognized that there was a lapse in funding for both the state library's state grants and aid program last year, but also funding for the Art Commission. And there were multiple requests and multiple stops to restore that funding. And between these two programs, we're talking about $500,000 in total to restore the funding that it was. So these are reflected in the governor's budget. I won't talk about these two later on, but I will talk about the top two as we move through these. But I did want to highlight those two. And then really the most prominent and most important theme that we heard throughout was, again, an appreciation for the partnership between the governor and the legislature and all the work that's happened to restore the state's fiscal health, and a strong desire to build on that momentum and not go backwards as we move forward. So that's sort of the backdrop. As I mentioned, that was a starting point for all budget decisions. We listened to those folks before she sat down and reviewed a single spreadsheet or looked at a single decision, and then kind of took that feedback into the decision-making process. So as we look at the shift gears a little bit and look at the revenue estimates, I think historically there's been a revenue estimate presentation prior to this, but I'll touch on this. This is just the fall consensus revenue estimates for total receipts, SGF receipts. And you got fiscal 25 actuals and then fiscal 26 and 27 forecasts. What I would draw your attention to is I've got two orange boxes on here. The top box shows the forecast for total taxes, and the second box shows the forecast for total receipts. So that includes items like transfers and agency earnings and interest earnings. I want to focus on the top box, the total taxes, because there's a little bit of noise in the other revenues area. So you'll see that fiscal 27 total taxes, SGF, are forecasted to grow by 1.3% over the fiscal 26 total taxes. So it's a 1.3% revenue growth. And that number we kind of had in the back of our mind as we went through the decision-making process and building the budget. So moving on from the revenue side to the expenditure side, again, wanted to make sure that we're minimizing any new spending and just funding areas that are really critical core services for government. So this slide here, we presented what the spending is by function of government and what the total is. So this column in the middle, this fiscal 26 legislative approved, that shows you what, by function of government, the SGF spending was approved coming out of the 2025 legislative session. So the budget bill that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor last year provided for $10.6 billion of SGF spending. What the governor is proposing, pardon me, for fiscal 27 is $10.8 billion, and you can see by function of government where the buckets are. And that represents a 1.6% increase over the fiscal 26 approved. However, that number includes also nearly $35 million of one-time expenditures. So if you back that number out and just look at the base expenditures, you're looking at a 1.3% increase in base expenditures for fiscal 27 relative to the fiscal 26 legislatively approved. So as I mentioned, the total taxes are forecasted to grow by 1.3%. So it was critical that the forecasted expenditures came in at or below that number as we march back towards structural balance across the out years. Pardon me. So diving a little bit deeper into some of the spending decisions and what's contained in the budget. The first item I'd like to spend a little bit of time on is what we're calling federal requirements. So there's been a shifting landscape at the federal level as it relates to approved spending, whether it's grants or appropriations or how items are funded. And most acutely with H.R. 1 that passed last summer, there were some new federal requirements for state spending to get these programs effectuated. The one I would highlight is specifically the SNAP program. There is a requirement that shifts an incremental portion of the administrative costs for this program away from the feds and onto the states. So it does not in fact make the program cheaper. It just moves the cost from the feds to the states. And so in fiscal 27, the governor is recommending $12.1 million of SGF to cover this new incremental share of administrative costs. I would note that this number would grow in fiscal 28 just based on how the fiscal years line up. So this would be 3/4 of the new federal fiscal year is $12.1 million. Fiscal 28 obviously would pick up 4/4 of that fiscal year. Additionally, H.R. 1 had some provisions for more stringent work requirements for the SNAP program and be able to administer those programs. The governor is adding $4 million of SGF across both fiscal 26 and fiscal 27 to make sure that we're compliant with these increased work requirements. Another item that came to our attention was on the FEMA side. There was some shifting guidance as it relates to the emergency management performance grants. And really what that was the allowable time frame for expenditures. The Division of Emergency Management received the NOFO and started acting in good faith according to the NOFO and making expenditures against that. And then they were instructed subsequently that the time frame for covered period shifted such that the time frame they were making expenditures was not covered. But those expenses had already been incurred. So the governor is recommending $5 million of SGF to backfill that account to make that whole. We've also had discussions with KDEM, the Division of Emergency Management, to make sure that we're sort of adjusting our protocol going forward and making sure that we're just doing 1 year at a time if this is going to be the new norm. So backfilling this critical component for this year, but also shifting our operations going forward. So I'd like to spend some time on education. This has obviously been a priority that the governor has spoken about every year that she's been in office, and something that we've made a vast amount of improvement on together between the legislature and the governor. So the governor is again recommending full constitutional funding for general education for K-12. And she is again recommending a 2-year appropriation as we've done the past several years. What this does is not only gets us through the budget year, but as we approach the end of the budget year, since the following year is already appropriated, it provides predictability and stability for the school districts to go ahead and extend contracts to teachers for the following school year. Now, it was mentioned with the previous conferee that the current school finance formula does sunset at the end of fiscal 27. So what the governor did is use the current school finance formula and extended that into fiscal 28 for purposes of recommending her budget. Absent any other direction on a finance formula, this felt like the most appropriate way to move that forward and set a baseline appropriation for fiscal 28. On top of that, the governor is again recommending money to eliminate co-payments for students on reduced lunch. The ask here is for $2.5 million of SGF. And what this would do is take the more than 34,000 kids that are currently receiving reduced price meals, and it would eliminate the copay that's associated with those reduced price meals. So they would move from having a copay to having no copay and effectively have the free lunch. So again, $2.5 million SGF would go a long ways to eliminating that copay for 34,000 students, specifically across rural Kansas. And then I've got listed at the bottom here, there were several items that saw a lapse during the 2025 legislative session. The governor would like to propose reinstating those at the levels that they were at. So $1.8 million for professional development state aid, $1.3 million from interteacher program, and $400,000 for the National Board Certification Scholarships. So as we move forward into special education as well, so I'm going to spend quite a bit more time on this than I have in the past because it's layered, if you will. So the governor is recommending an incremental $50.6 million of SGF to fund special education for fiscal year 27. Now, if it's only this $50.6 million of incremental funding, that improves our funding of excess costs to 70%. We recognize that it's far short of the 92% that is outlined in statute, and we have not met the 92% that's outlined in statute for 15 years. However, the governor also recognizes and has been pretty vocal about the fact that the funding for special education is really a shared responsibility between the federal government and the state government. So the governor is calling on the feds again to meet their obligation and increase their level of funding here in Kansas for special education. We simply cannot get to 92% without more federal support. So the way the rule is written is the federal government is to provide up to 40% funding for up to 40% of total costs. They don't have to provide right at 40%, but up to 40%. Well, as we look at the last 15 or so years, we've seen that the federal funding has remained effectively flat. And right now, they are only covering 12% of special education costs. So they're far off that 40% mark. In contrast, the state has increased our level of funding during the same time frame by over $240 million. So the state has certainly shown our support, and we're just asking our federal partners to increase their support as well to meet their obligation. I put on this slide here a couple of visuals that help really demonstrate what's happening here. So if you look at the top chart, it's a very simple line graph. The green line represents the state's funding in dollars from academic year 2015 through the governor's proposed budget for 2027. You can see a substantial increase here. The red line is during that same time frame, the level of federal support that we've gotten. So it really has not moved a whole lot. And at the bottom, I put a table in there that just represents the dollars from the graph above. So you can see our starting point back in 2015, the state was at $418 million. We're now at $661 million. So that's an increase of $243 million. By contrast, the federal government started at $125 million back then. They're at $158 million today, assuming they hold their level of funding. So it's only less than a $33 million increase. And if you look at what the cost side of the equation is doing, it's gone up every year. So back in 2015, with a lower amount, we were covering 82% of the total cost for special education. Right now, we're only covering 70%. So we really need the support from the federal government on this. And then this table here, I'm trying to demonstrate what the impact of the federal dollars would be to the whole pot of special education funding. So there's a lot going on here, but these tables are set up the same way. They just have different numbers in them. So I would focus first on the table on the left. This represents the current school finance formula plus the $50.6 million of SGF that the governor is recommending, but no new federal dollars. So if we assume that the governor's recommendation makes its way through and is adopted and no new federal support, you'll see right here that the shortfall for special education is still nearly $208 million. This table on the right is the exact same thing from the state's perspective. So adding the $50.6 million of incremental SGF that the governor is recommending, and then asking the feds to increase their funding to just 28.6%. If they do that, if the feds move to 28.6% of the total cost, and then the state adds $50.6 million to the bucket, we are statutorily funding special education at the 92% of excess costs. So again, you recall I said the feds are to cover up to 40%. This 28.6% is still far short of the 40%. And in terms of the dollar investment from the feds, it's going to require an amount that is relatively equal to the amount that the state has increased their funding over the past 12 years as well. So we are not asking more of the federal government than what the state has been willing to contribute. We just are asking for them to contribute at the same level that we have, and that will get us on a path to full funding of special education in the very near future, which then makes a subsequent year increases much, much more palatable and easy to attain. So that's really the story of special education, is the state wants to make sure that we're making our investment. You know, the governor mentioned last night, while we're pushing the feds to increase their share, we're certainly not just going to wait on them. We have an obligation to act as well, which is why she's recommending the $50 million. But it becomes pretty clear as you work through these numbers that we have a strong case to make to the federal government to increase their share, and that's what we plan to do. So if we shift gears a little bit and move on to another high priority topic area, we're going to talk about water for a little bit. So water remains among the top priorities in the state, not just for the administration, but obviously for many in the legislature. It's one of the most critical resources that we have in the state, and we know we have a tall order ahead of us to make sure that it's available for the next several generations. So the governor is, again, and I have a typo here, I say for the fourth year in a row, it's really for the fifth year in a row, recommending full funding for the state water plan fund. And you might say, well, Adam, of course she's recommending full funding. That's what the law says. But there was about a 15-year period where we were not meeting that obligation, and that was just a few years ago. So the state went from fiscal 2009 all the way through fiscal 2022 not meeting the statutory obligation for water plan funding. So we just want to recognize that it's recently become fully funded, and we just want to make sure that that becomes the norm and standard operating procedure going forward. Now, on top of the two statutorily required amounts for water plan funding, the governor is again recommending the $35 million of incremental funding that was provided for in 2023 House Bill 2302. So you can see on this table on the bottom left what the total funding would be for the state's water plan fund under this recommendation. But beyond the basic statutory funding, the governor is clearly very interested in developing a long-term programming and roadmap for water plan funding. She's very excited that the water program task force was created last year and is excited about the work they're going to do. And she wants to again partner with the legislature to develop a sustainable and long-term water roadmap. The goal would be to develop a 10-year roadmap for water programming across the state to address needs in both quantity and quality. And this would really be analogous to how we handle transportation programming in the state. You think about the IKE program that's in place right now. We're working our way through. We set a strategic roadmap of 10 years, but we made it flexible enough to kind of pivot at certain points of the year and to make sure that we were doing local consults, something along those lines to ensure that we're focused on water, and water is at the forefront of all policy decisions as we move forward into the next generation. And I think even more importantly, the governor would like to sit down and partner with the legislature and the water program task force to identify a permanent and sustainable funding source to address the state's long-term water needs. You know, again, drawing an analog to the highway fund, or excuse me, the transportation program, we have dedicated revenue sources for that, whether it's 18% of sales tax or the 23% gas tax. We sat down and we worked out what it would take to have sustainable funding. The governor would be interested in partnering with the water program task force and any legislator that would be open to that conversation. We don't know what that is right now, but we know it's critical, and we know it's going to take some tough work, and she's willing to help out there. So as we're waiting on the 10-year programming to get developed and identify what that looks like, there are some current needs in the water plan that she's wanting to address. So within her budget, she's recommending funding for a host of projects, and I won't read through them, but I've enumerated some of these here that would address some rather immediate needs across the state. And this would leave the water plan fund in balance. There's certainly more that we could do, but we're trying to operate within the parameters of what's available in the state water plan fund. Pardon me. So that's water programming. It's very important, and it'll take up a lot of time. But I want to shift gears and move on to another topic. And again, this is one that we heard about a lot during the People's Budget Tour in Human Services. So on the waiver side, there are a couple of buckets that the governor is recommending incremental funding for either new waiver or existing waiver. So most notably, the top one there is funding to fully implement the new community support waiver, which is not yet stood up. This will require an SGF investment of $3.6 million or an all funds investment of $9 million in fiscal 27. And really the goal for this is to alleviate some of the stress from the current IDD waiver. This new waiver will provide a menu of options and an opportunity for folks that don't require the full slate of services provided by the IDD waiver to move over to the community support waiver and get more targeted resources on that waiver. And by moving those folks to this waiver and having more targeted resources, it should free up capacity on the IDD waiver and hopefully manage that wait list a little bit better going forward. The second area of investment here, pardon me, is funding to address the increased demand for the TA waiver. That's the technology assistance waiver. And this waiver is really for children who are under the age of 21 who require life-sustaining medical equipment and technology to be able to live in their homes and their community environment. So absent this $2.8 million SGF investment, we'd be looking at adding a wait list to this waiver. So this funding is intended to avoid a wait list and be able to address the increased demand for this waiver. Quite honestly, if there is a wait list on this waiver, what that leads to is prolonged hospitalizations and institutionalization for this population. So, you know, from a care perspective, that's obviously not the best place for these children to be. We'd rather them be at home and in their communities. And from a cost perspective, there's also additional cost within the hospital system. So trying to address that and move them to get the services that they need to be successful in their homes. Pardon me. Sticking with the human services theme, the state hospital system, and this is one that came up quite a bit, and we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years. So we recognize that there is both a capacity issue across the state hospital system, but also staffing issues. So the governor is recommending funding to address both of these to make a more robust state hospital system. So the first order of business here is $30.9 million all funds to go towards the new South Central Regional Mental Health Hospital. This funding will allow this hospital to be fully staffed and fully operational during fiscal year 27. This is something that we've all been talking about for a couple of years. And by having this funding added, this will complete that project, which will now open an additional 104 beds of capacity, which is really helping to add to the state's system and should alleviate stress as some of the other hospitals, whether it's Larned or Osawatomie or others. In addition to that, the governor is recommending $3 million that comes from SIBF for capital improvements at KNI. And this would be to modify an existing building there, which would create 15 to 30 beds for behavioral health beds for children at that hospital. So again, trying to make incremental progress on the capacity side. And then the last one here for capacity, this is funding that has been in place, I believe, the last two budget cycles, but certainly the last one. The governor is recommending to continue the $5 million investment for the 6 specific hospitals across the state to assist with adult inpatient behavioral health beds. The funding formula to distribute across the hospitals will be the same as it has been in the past couple of years. And there will be a pretty strong caveat you'll see in the governor's budget language that this funding expires at the end of fiscal 27 as the state brings on the new South Central Hospital. So this is just to help with capacity as until we bring the new hospital online. On the staffing side, most acutely, we've recognized the shortages at Larned and Osawatomie state hospitals. We've been having a fund contract nursing to just cover basic operations. We are clearly interested in a plan to alleviate that and work towards state staffing, but until such time that we're there, the governor recognizes that we need to have these hospitals staffed. So she's recommending $32.2 million SGF each in fiscal 26 and fiscal 27 to fund the contract staffing at Larned State Hospital. This is a safety issue as much as anything. And then Osawatomie State Hospital, the request would be for $7 million in fiscal year 26. And that reduces down to $5 million in fiscal 27. So between some of the various programs that we've implemented over the past couple of years, whether it's the differentials and increased pay or the bonus flexibility, we've seen some improvement at Osawatomie. So it's good to see the gains there and certainly want to see if we can replicate that at other places. But this is what the system feels they need to get through the years. I'll wrap up the highlights of the governor's budget, talking about state employee pay. Again, kind of harken back to where things were a long time ago. It bears repeating. There's about a 10-year time frame where state employees received no pay increase. There was just not money for a pay increase. And during that same time frame, the employee contribution for state employee health plan increased over a 3-year stretch, high double digits each year. So 25% to 30% year over year over year. So employees' paychecks were actually getting smaller during that time frame. There's been a lot of work that's gone into adjusting that and recognizing and recalibrating state employee pay. We certainly appreciate the partnership with the legislature to make sure that we're paying our employees a fair wage and recognizing the work that they do for our citizens. So the governor is again recommending a 2.5% statewide pay adjustment for all executive branch employees. That comes with a cost of $33 million SGF and $88 million all funds. It has the standard caveats that we discuss every year, pardon me, where it excludes elected officials, teachers at the schools for the blind and deaf because they're tied to the Olathe school districts, and any employee that's on approved career progression plan. They will remain on those progression plans, so this would be for the balance. A couple of other exclusions in this year's recommendation would be excluding the professional staff in the legislative branch, as well as the professional staff in the judicial branch. And that's because in the judicial branch budget submission, they propose targeted pay increases for their employees that average out to about 2.5%. And by statute, the governor is not able to modify the judicial branch's budget. So it's just simply a pass through on to the legislature. So because that was always covered or already covered, she excluded them from her pay plan. Similarly, the legislative branch budget submission that was submitted to us contained a 10% increase for their professional staff. She made no modifications to the legislature's budget and passed it on through. So because that 10% increase was already in there, she excluded that branch from the 2.5% pay adjustment that you have for executive branch employees. And then just one other thing I would note here is the GBR, the governor's budget report, is ready to go. So the legislation that is used to enact the governor's budget is ready for introduction into committees. It's been written and it's ready to go. We have RS numbers ready for each chamber. That satisfies the requirement laid out in statute to have a legislative measure ready for submission at the start of legislative session. And then I would note that GBR volumes 1 and 2, which are parts 1 and 2 of the governor's budget report recommended by statute, have been published. We went back to publishing hard copies this year. We hadn't done that for a little while. We'll post the soft copy on our website by 1 o'clock this afternoon, but we are delivering hard copies of these to every single legislator's office. I've got written on here that they'll be in the chamber. We pivoted and made a different decision. We're going to actually just deliver to everybody's office so you have that available to you. These books are a wealth of information. It's nearly 900 pages of analysis and review and introduction to how the state's budgets are created and what's contained in those and what the budget requests were and where we landed. And then, Mr. Chairman, I would just round out by saying there's appendix material in here as well. I will not review this. I'll let you review that at your leisure. You're certainly welcome to ask questions about them if you have it. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I am done, and I am more than happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Adam. First off, you know, on the 40 million additional dollars for the SNAP program, there was 4 million additional dollars. Is that for staffing? What is that $4 million going to be used for? Is that you're hiring new employees there? You know, you said it was a $4 million cost to implement the work requirement.
Yes, sir. I will have to come back to you with the specifics on exactly what's in there. But as we worked with DCF and the agency, as they look through what the work requirements were and what it would take to effectuate those, they recognize that they're going to need new staffing, new support, new things. So I will get you the specifics on that. And I should have mentioned, I'm sorry, that any questions I'm not able to answer here, I will have in one document and deliver to the entire committee by the end of the day Friday. But yes, there are costs associated with these new work requirements that are being placed on the agency, so they need that funding to make that happen.
But you don't know them today, so you'll find out for us, correct?
I have them on a different file that is not open in front of me right now.
Okay, and also, you know, on the mental hospitals in Larned, you put 32.2 million. I think last year we put over 40 million. So what's the plan there? Are we going to just hire less staff, or have we hired more staff? Why are we able to lower that?
Yeah, so we received, thank you, Mr. Chair. We received an updated forecast from Deputy Secretary Bruner as he reviewed what the needs are at each of the hospitals. And this is the most current information they gave us on what their needs would be to cover contract staffing at those two hospitals.
And is that the same for Osawatomie?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They provided both at the same time, and it's the most current forecast.
Okay, Chairman Waymaster.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to go back to some of the appendix items that you had in the governor's budget report, specifically in regards to $517 million in reappropriations that is going to transpire between fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 2026. And in looking at some of those items, obviously some of those are contractual or they're infrastructure where they just had to carry over into the next fiscal year. But I'm showing on page 29 of this document that there's only $26 million that the governor is proposing to lapse the reappropriation. Is that correct?
I am trying to find where that $26 million is that you're looking at, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry.
Well, it says Department of Corrections lapse evidence-based program reappropriation of 23.6 million, Sentencing Commission lapse reappropriation of 2.4.
Gotcha. Understood. Mr. Chair, if I may, the reappropriations is $517 million.
Right.
Everything below that is not necessarily a component of the $517 million. So that's just one of the items. This kind of gets you to what the total ending balance would be. There is some on the evidence-based program. She is recommending lapsing $23.6 million of that reappropriation.
Those are the only those are the only two items that is in conjunction with the reappropriations.
Correct, on this sheet, yes.
Yes.
And we have a spreadsheet in my office that I'm willing to compile and get back to this committee by the end of the day Friday that shows exactly what the reappropriations were. As you mentioned, several of them are related to capital projects. It's not uncommon for those to reappropriate into a future year if the project is not done. And it's also important to note that when an item reappropriates from one fiscal year to the next, it does not increase the base expenditures for the following year. So stated differently, these were items that were funded and approved in fiscal 25 that did not get spent. They reappropriated into fiscal 26, but there is no connection from 26 into 27 unless there is an affirmative act of the legislature to put it there.
Well, I think you and I are having a meeting next week when you're back in the office, but we'll have a discussion in regards to those because from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25, I believe the amount was around 620 million that was reappropriated. And this year from 25 to 26, it's now another $517 million. And going through all of the items that was reappropriated from fiscal year 25 to 26, I have accounted about $287 million that we could possibly lapse. So you and I will have that discussion at a later time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to reference page 11 and also reference page 28. On page 11, it talks about the federal HR 1 shifted significant costs to state administer the SNAP program, and you put a 12.1 million SGF increase. If we go to page 28, on that page, it shows that human services caseloads have doubled from 2022 to fiscal year 2027 with 711 million to 1.4 billion. And from 26 and to 27, it's about an 8% increase. So I make those statements to set the context for my question. My question is, where can I find in the budget the costs for the anticipated $40 million error rate payment that Kansas will be charged because Kansas has a very poor error rate. We need to be under 6%, and last year we were at 12%, and I know we're moving downward. Hopefully we'll be in the 9% range, but even if we're at 8 to 9%, Kansans will have to pay for the DCF's error rate. And my question really is around that. Where is it in the budget? And also, if I look at 2015, our error rate was just over 1%. And then in a few years later, our error rate is under 5%. So it seems like since the governor has been overseeing SNAP, that the error rate has increased every single year that it has been recorded, except 2024 when they received a letter from the federal government. So if you could address the error rate and where that additional $40 million is in the budget, and was it included?
Thank you, Madam Representative. Mr. Chair, if I may. I will work backwards on those questions. So the first question about SNAP, the error rate, the incremental share for the cost of the program relative to the error rate that you're discussing in the current $40 million forecast, that does not go into effect until fiscal 28. So because this is a fiscal 27 budget recommendation, you're not going to find that in here. fiscal 28 would be the earliest that would happen. Obviously, if we get to that point next year, then we'll address it then and determine how that gets into the budget. Additionally, it's not contained in this presentation, but it is in the governor's budget recommendation. DCF has identified a number of projects and ways that they could work towards reducing that error rate. They're certainly committed to that. And the governor funded, I don't remember the amount of money, it's $2 million, I think, maybe $3 million for projects that will assist them in reducing that error rate. And that funding pales in comparison to what the cost could be should the error rate remain that high. I believe the Secretary Howard, was before a committee last week discussing the error rate, discussing what goes into it, and discussing what some of their mitigation strategies are. I think she'd be best prepared to talk to some of those things. But again, the short answer is that's not in this budget because that does not occur until fiscal 28. States have an opportunity to get there. We are below the national average, and I know that doesn't matter because we're in Kansas and we're focused on Kansas. But we are working towards pushing that number down pretty significantly. It is a high priority, not just for them, but for the administration to make sure that we address that appropriately. I can't recall if there were other questions. I think you said that was your only question. You referenced some other items, but let me know if I missed something, please.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for this presentation. Just a quick question on the special education funding. Are all tax revenues attributable to special education included in the governor's budget? For example, how we equalize special education, local dollars. Are all special education tax revenue included in this budget?
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question. It is calculated the way that the consensus revenue estimating group, or excuse me, consensus caseload group estimates special education. So we use the formula that is in statute. We walk through all the machinations of that and develop what the estimate should be for special education. So it is congruent with statute and what everything should be in there, and it's agreed upon by K-12, by KLRD, pardon me, and by division of the budget.
Follow up if
Go
I may,
ahead,
Mr.
please.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but there is additional tax revenue that isn't counted in that formula, correct? The equalization, some local dollars. I'm getting estimates of probably around an additional $100 million. Is that accurate?
I can't verify the accuracy or inaccuracy of the $100 million that you referenced unless I see it in front of me. Happy to sit down with you and walk through that individually if that would be more helpful. But again, the way we've calculated this and the tables that I showed come directly from the K-12 consensus group, and we just do it according to how statute describes the formula. So all the revenues that should be in there according to statute are captured.
Thank you. I will look forward to sitting down and going over that with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Bueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Adam. I've got two quick questions. On page 21, when we're talking about adding an additional 3.6 million SGF, and with the goal being to free up additional slots from that IDD waiver, I'm curious if there's been a projection of how many slots that will free up. So that would be question one. And then question two is on page 22. This one just kind of caught me a little off guard. When we're talking about capital improvements at K&I to create an additional 15 to 30 behavioral health beds for children, I'm not questioning the need to create those beds. I'm not really understanding why that location. Can you tell me where the geographical demand would be coming for 15 to 30 more beds at K&I? So those are my two questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. I do not know how many slots we would be freeing up on the IDD waiver with a community support waiver. I can get you as a follow-up, because I want to make sure I get it accurately and not just based on memory, the number of slots that would be available on the community support waiver, and that should help give an idea of how many folks will be servicing on that and how many additional Kansans will be able to get some support at some level. Then I'll work with the agency to see if there's any information they can provide for a forecast, and that'll be on my follow-up that I provide by Friday. As it relates to your question on K&I, there's a specialized population that goes to that hospital with very certain and specific needs. And I think they come from, wherever across the state. So I can work with the agency to see if if they've mapped out, if there's a wait list or folks that have been identified that could be coming from and where they'd be coming from as well. We'll make sure we get that to you by Friday as well.
If I may, Mr. Chair, it
Yes,
just
go
seems
ahead.
like the purpose of K&I is a little bit incongruous with additional behavioral health beds for children. So that's really what I'm trying to understand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Adam, for being here. I'm going to speak specifically about the, again, attempted lapse at the Evidence-Based Juvenile Justice Fund. This is something that we've seen repeatedly in the governor's budget. I think that even though I wasn't in this building in the 80s and 90s, when we transformed the mental health system and shut down a lot of state facilities and put that back on our community, we see the results of what happens when that funding does not flow down from the state to the local level again. When we passed SB 367 shortly before I arrived, the juvenile justice reform, we did a very similar thing. We shut down 5 state facilities, and we said we're going to ensure that this money, this savings, gets into our local community to deal with these juvenile justice issues on a local level. So here we are trying to take money again out of that fund set aside for our local communities. Is it the governor's intent then to go back to just reincarcerating juveniles because we're going to take that money away from our local communities who need it desperately to deal with the juvenile crisis situation that exists?
Mr. Chair, if I may. Thank you for the question, Senator. To answer your question directly, no, that is not our intent, is to reincarcerate individuals. That's certainly not what the goal of this would be. This fund we've reviewed for the past several years, and for whatever reason, and I'm not making disparaging comments or saying anything is behind, but the planned expenditures the actual expenditures have not met the planned expenditures. And so the balances continue to grow in this fund, and it appears that the resources that are needed are a little bit below what the resources available would be. So just trying to right size that and recalibrate that. If there's a definitive and hard plan that shows what the expenditures would be for this $23.6 million and something demonstrable and firm that we can grasp, I think that conversation might be a little bit different. But as we look over the past several years, this wasn't just a one-year deal, as you mentioned. The actual expenditures historically have been coming in significantly below the planned expenditures. So the balance has grown significantly.
Yeah, and so you're right. And so I'm very glad to hear that, because my concern is if these funds disappear into the ether, also known as the state general fund, we are going to be put back into a situation where incarceration is the only option. The reality is with this fund, you're right, those expenditures have not went out as fast, but that is not only as much the legislator's fault for restricting what those funds can be used for so significantly, but there are changes coming to that are going to increase access to juvenile crisis intervention centers that will draw down these funds significantly. And so it is my goal to continue to ensure that these funds remain accessible and utilized in the juvenile justice space. Thanks again, Adam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much. Artificial intelligence we see occurring, the changes rippling through the various corporations. Many of them have started downsizing because the effects. You don't have to answer it now, but would you please provide information about how different agencies under your direction are being asked to put a plan together for how artificial intelligence will affect the service delivery system? Second, the error rate that was brought up by the vice chair, it almost sounded like you were putting that off, or the secretary was putting that off till next year when it goes into effect. Can you please put together a detailed plan of how we're going to start dealing with that now? And final thing is the contract labor figure of 32 million that you put in, and last year it was 40-some million. either we were way off or we're way off or you're way off this year. I don't see that they've changed from everything I've heard, $8 to $10 million. So could you please check those figures and get back with the committee sometime? Thank you very much, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, if I may, as it relates to your first question on AI, there is an overarching AI policy, and that actually comes from the Office of Information Technology Services. It may not be as robust as what you're wanting or targeted as what you're wanting, but it does provide some guardrails for agencies as they work into the world of AI. We want to make sure that we are utilizing it, but doing so responsibly. So there's some pretty stringent guardrails, but also some use cases for how this could be used. As it relates to service delivery, I would have to work with specific agencies, but as part of the follow-up, I will get you the OITS overarching policy for AI for how agencies can use it. For the error rate, I apologize if I misrepresented this. What I was not saying was we're kicking the can down the road and we'll deal with it later. What I was saying is that according to HR 1, the penalties, if you will, related to error rate do not go into effect until fiscal 28. This budget is through fiscal 27 with few exceptions, so the money is not contained in fiscal 27. Additionally, we don't know yet what the error rate will be for the starting point that would drive the fiscal 28 number. We're certainly hopeful that it'll be low enough such that we're not paying $40 million, but in no way was I trying to insinuate that we're kicking the can down the road. And on the contract labor, again, to reiterate, these are numbers that we received from the Deputy Secretary of Hospitals and Facilities. So I'll circle back and double check and make sure that that's what it is. And I believe that was all the questions you asked, sir. And thank you for the well wishes.
Representative Helgerson, did you have a follow-up?
Just real quick, on artificial intelligence, I understand and I've seen some of the paperwork, but you have budget implications this year in this budget that have dramatic effect on how we deal with staffing in the Department of Revenue, how we deal with the tag offices in particular, how they're looking to upgrade the computer systems. It's on a agency by agency basis, and we probably need to sit down and have more detail in cooperation with the administration about how we start implementing it, because it's coming faster than we'd like. Thank you very much, and again, hope you feel better.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, Adam. I want to follow up on the SNAP error. Since we're having a conversation on it, I also hear that there may be a proposal for a 2-year extension on paying the SNAP error, giving the multiple states that are having problems with errors an opportunity to bring their error rate down lower. Could you comment on that, please?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that question. If you wouldn't mind repeating it.
All I'm saying with the error rate, I hear there may be a 2-year extension on paying that because so many states are in error that this may give them an opportunity to bring that down. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I'm not the world's foremost technical expert on this, but as I speak with a lot of my peers across the country, this has obviously been a topic because, as I mentioned, we are below the national average. So we are far from the only state that is dealing with this. There is considerable pushback looking for some extension opportunities. I think there's a well, I won't use that term. There's a weird provision in there where if your error rate is extremely high, there is a 1-year delay for the implementation. I certainly would not suggest going down that path. But it's, the way it is right now, I think it's best for us to plan for doing everything we can to attack the error rate, get that down to a manageable and reduced level, which again, the governor did provide funding for some error reduction activities and programs that the Secretary of DCF would be able to speak to in more detail a little bit later to help us get on that path.
Okay, and thank you. And the other one, I want to go with special education. On your tour, I'm sure you must have heard from a lot of people. I'll use Lawrence as an example. Lawrence School District has had to pay $14 million to meet the federal obligation for special education out of their operational expenses. Did you hear that around the state as well? And is that why the governor actually is recommending the 50% since we are well below the 92% that's required?
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Representative. Short answer, yes. We heard that at just about every stop. We had superintendents from all around the state. Some traveled many, many miles to each of the stops. They weren't just from the communities that we were in, but they were near that. So they came in and they expressed what we've heard in legislative committees and in other places, that if the state does not fully fund special education, the school is obligated to fund those. So their funding source becomes general education funds. So they're diverting resources away from general education to cover special education. So yes, that was mentioned multiple times on the stop by superintendents and others.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Adam, thank you. Appreciate your being here, and we all hope you get well soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the flexibility.
Committee, we are adjourned.